Okay, I want to thank everybody for tuning into this program. This is kind of an unexpected twist to tonight's show because I was supposed to have Professing Preterist on tonight. He hasn't showed up. I'm still waiting for him. He's still got some time to show up, but I kind of thought this was going to happen because I tried to contact him. I suggested doing a show, and he said, "Well, actually, it started a couple of weeks ago. I suggested, he have a talk with Tristan because Tristan Gabriel, who's been on the show several times now, he wanted to talk to him, and we want to talk about full preterism. We want to talk about is full preterism a correct doctrine? And if it's a correct doctrine, does it lead to other conclusions like, say, IO and universalism? So I said, well, are you gonna debate IO? And he says, yeah, sure. But of course, he never contacted me, and I kind of had to chase him down at his channel. And then I suggested, well, maybe we can have a show, just a sit down, a polite sit down where nobody's, throwing stones at each other. We're just trying to understand each other's positions. And, I had a hard time getting a hold of him. Finally, he gave me his email address, but I sent him the link, didn't hear anything. And to me, that's a red flag when somebody sends you a link and, you don't respond. It probably means you're not interested, right? Anyways, give him a few more minutes, but I don't think he's going to come to the show tonight for reasons which probably are pretty apparent at this point, because we did a show the other night that was actually one of my best. Well, I want to say one of our best, but it was also, since I started this channel, I'm coming up on my 2-year anniversary, and it was one of my best panel discussions that I've had. And I've had some great panel discussions, but going back to last summer when we had some of these, and we had different views. We had there was a couple of panel discussions where there was like 5 or 6 people. It got to be a little bit too much. It got to be a little overkill. And so then we did, we scaled it back a little, and then there was a rift between, people that were on my show that were, inciting, insulting people and just being disrespectful. So that kind of frustrated the panels for a while. And so last, several months, I've basically been trying to get them back off the ground again. We've had some great panels with Jeremy and with SoCal Preston, and we hope to continue having those. But we also have had Steve C. and Tristan on, and we did a great show the other night, but the show kind of, the results that I was expecting didn't really materialize and that's because of the unbalance. Because we had Steve was the only full preterist in the room, and I try to be as balanced as possible, but this was totally unintentional. Jeremy and Tristan, of course, Jeremy's more neutral. He doesn't take a firm stance on any eschatology at this point. And then, of course, Tristan is IO, or he's actually not IO anymore, but he's more of a cessationist, and he leans towards a more mythological approach. So, it was bound to be, I saw myself, as I still see myself, as sort of like the middleman who tries to keep things balanced, because I agree with some of the tenets of preterism, and I agree with some of the tenets of, say, even dispensationalism. I agree with some of those tenets, but I'm not going to, commit to either party. I'm not going to commit to either side. So, this goes back to, some of the best advice I've ever received, from an SMU ethics professor, told me, always stay in the middle. Always stay in the middle. You can't go wrong. And I found that to be some of the greatest advice. But, this discussion was actually great. What I want to do is I just want to walk through. I don't think I'm going to have a chance to do any kind of in-depth review, but I just want to walk through some of the comments, because the comments are really, there was a lot of comments coming through, and I woke up this morning and there was quite a few comments left. Some of them are really cheeky and kind of rude, but the majority of the comments, there was a lot of stuff said, and I didn't have a chance to answer them all, unfortunately. But I think the biggest probably the biggest concern that Steve had was that he felt that, with all of the skepticism and rationalism and whatever, he felt kind of like burned by it all, mythicism, skepticism, which was really, there was really no well, I'm not gonna say there was no skepticism. I was trying, and I was trying to make it very clear that, from my standpoint, because I can only speak for myself. From my standpoint, I'm definitely like the farthest thing from a skeptic that anyone will ever meet. And I have a very firm belief in, the Word of God. I have a very firm conviction in Christ and His salvific work and His plan of salvation. I also have a systematic theology, which I believe, and I've been, well, let's just say quasi systematic theology, which I believe I've been teaching for many years, in various stages of development. So, again, here I am trying to be the restorer of balance. And it ended up kind of, things were brought up that probably burned Steve a little bit. And look, the whole thing with the texts, I mean, if you go to any seminary, they will tell you that the texts, the Greek text and the Hebrew texts we have in today, they're not pure texts. What we mean by that is, they're not like in their state, they're like the original. So the original autographs, so that's why I said, inerrancy is, I don't believe it's correct because I think there are mistakes in the Bible. Now, those mistakes. Now, I didn't say that those mistakes were the fault of the original author. I didn't say that. What I said is that the mistakes are a result of the imperfect copies that that have been passed down to us. And there's a lot of conservative scholars that will agree with me on that. If you go to any, say, Baptist seminary, they'll talk about it and they'll discuss it and they'll present it. Now, they'll probably end up taking the side of, say, conservatism, that, Peter wrote Peter, Paul wrote the epistles of Paul. I understand that that's fine, but they'll still present it. They'll still present the views that are out there. And I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at some of those views. I mean, I think, personally, I think higher criticism. I think a lot of it is trash. I think a lot of it is rubbish. But there's some things that that you have to look at and say, well, maybe maybe they have a point. Again, I like to stay in the middle. I don't like to lean too strong to any extreme. So I always sift through what is being presented. As far as Second Peter, I mean, again, I did a video on Second Peter. This goes all the way back to the very beginning of the Christian age. People have doubted that Peter wrote it. I mean, if you look at the internal evidence, there's no way the same person who wrote First Peter can have written Second Peter. There's just too many linguistic differences. I mean, he's quoting Josephus. The parts from which he's quoting weren't completed until 93 AD. That's just the internal evidence. There's a lot of external evidence which suggests that the Second Peter, was a lot slower to be accepted into the New Testament canon. Which is why when we did this discussion with Steve, Tristan, and Jeremy the other night, I made sure I brought this up, and I said, that this Bible's not some magical book that you can use to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, there's things in it which I believe are still in our future, but the idea and attitude that we have a perfect book is kind of off. And I left a comment, and I think all of Steve's comments got pulled because I think he just wanted to stay in the sidelines for a while. So he kind of withdrew from the discussion. But I told him, I said, and that was actually the comment that I was looking for. And then I forgot that he pulled his comments. So what I said to him was, I said, I don't think, because he said, why didn't God preserve the text? And I said, well, I think God preserved the faith. I mean, that's my presupposition. So we meet in the middle on a lot of issues, just like I meet in the middle with a lot of my more fundamentalist friends on many issues of the faith. I meet with, Bullinger. I meet with Schofield on many issues. I meet with, SoCal Preston on many issues. I meet with, Tommy Ice on many issues. I meet with Irenaeus on many issues. The list goes on and on and on and on. But, God preserving the text isn't as important to me as God preserving the faith. I would rather say that God didn't preserve the original text, but he preserved the faith, than say that God preserved the faith. He gave us a perfect text, but he didn't give us a perfect, he let the faith go all over the place. And so that's where we have all these different views. You've got 10,000 Protestant denominations. You've got, all these different views of eschatology, and they will all argue from this premise that the Bible's inerrant. And then they'll say, and the Bible teaches what I'm teaching you. So they're giving all these different views, and they're attributing their personal privatized interpretations to the infallible, inerrant word of God. And that, I think, is a little intellectually dishonest. So I do believe that God preserved the faith. I do believe he preserved the form of sound words, which, as Timothy said, a form is a hupotoposis, which is like a sketch or an outline. It's probably some kind of formal creed. We don't know. But, it's a form of sound words, and it basically stipulates the outline of the Christian faith. So even if you don't have a creed, there's certain things that Christians have always believed in. There are certain things. There's things like the deity of Christ, the virgin birth, the sacrificial substitutionary atonement, Christ's physical resurrection from the dead, his physical ascension into heaven, his present session at the right hand of God, his coming again to judge the quick and the dead, or the living and the dead, and the life of the age to come, and of course, the Catholic Church, which is simply a unified body. In other words, Christ's body isn't divided into 10,000 different warring members. That's not what anybody meant by the Catholic Church. They meant it was a unified church. And so, I agree with some of the reformers with the invisible church. I mean, Adam was a member of the church. Abel was a member of the church. This is the church of the firstborn. So it's all the elect, whoever have been, will be, or presently are, from the foundation of the world until the last elect is sealed. I think that's good divinity. I think it's good theology. I subscribe to that. At the same time, if the faith hasn't been preserved, what do we? I mean, that's what we're doing. He gave us a perfect book, but to what end is it? To what end is having a perfect book if it doesn't ensure a perfect or infallible or inerrant interpretation? So it doesn't make sense. But if he preserved the one faith, then there you go. He may not have preserved, the original purity of the text, but I posted a post on this the other day about inspiration. I don't believe inspiration means inerrant. I think it means God-breathed communications. And I think men are still inspired today. I think inspiration has been going on all through the Christian age. I think, Irenaeus was inspired. He wasn't inerrant, of course, but I think there's inspired teachings in his works. I think, Charles Spurgeon was inspired. I think John Calvin was inspired. I think some of the views that I've presented on this channel are inspired. Of course, most of them didn't come from me. Most of them came from theologians that I've read. But we give you this stuff, and I think that the only way that the church can communicate in real time with the world today is through the gift of inspiration, through the gift of the Holy Spirit. And God-breathed communications are still given by the church. They agree with the analogy of faith. They agree with the one true faith. So you're not going to have somebody tell you something different from what everybody else said, but I think it's still very much valid. And I think that brings a lot of clarity. I think that brings a lot of health and a lot of sanity to religion, a lot of sanity, in especial to the Christian religion, because a lot of folks are, they look at all this doctrinal division, they look at all these different sects, and they say, hey, I thought Christ was supposed to do better than this. And, we've got a perfect inerrant word, we've got the Holy Spirit, but we can't seem to agree on the most basic things anymore. And we could go down the road of saying, well, that was all predicted, it was apostasy, but it's really been going on from the beginning. There's always been different views. But God will use his ministers, he'll use his people, he'll use the faithful to continue promulgating the faith, even in times of affliction. And I think that's a comforting thought. I think it's comforting to know that we have a faith that has continued. And it's not just a faith found in one denomination or one sect. It's a faith that can be found anywhere. It's a faith, you might find it in the Methodist Church, you might find it in the Lutheran Church, you may find it in the Episcopal Church or the Presbyterian Church or the Baptist Church. The elect are spread out all over the world. You can't form them into one mass and say, well, these are the elect. You've got the wheat and the tares; they're mixed, and they will remain mixed until the end of the Adamic age. So, getting back to this, this wonderful, albeit controversial panel discussion, I think we did a great job, and I think we brought out some good things. But again, Steve was the only full preterist. I did apologize to him about that. I said, hey, look, I'm sorry, if we seem to pile on. It was not intentional. It was, trust me, it wasn't intentional. It was just that's the way it happened. And I sent him an email earlier and I just told him, I say, hey, look, the problem that I've historically had with these panel discussions is, it's very hard getting people because, you're trying to get everybody together at a certain time. And if you can get everybody on the same page, that's great, but it ends up usually being the same people over and over and over again. So it doesn't always, it's hard to get everybody in the same room at the same time, and at the same time to get a balance, to get a balanced perspective. If you haven't watched this video, go ahead and watch it. And I think it's very good. It's at my channel right now. Now I'm coming up to about 500 subscribers, and I will tell you, it is slow, buddy. It is. I mean, I knew this would be hard work when I started this channel. Before I started this channel, one of the reasons why I put it off for so long is because I knew, because I've done social media before, and I've been on the internet for a long time, and I know how hard it is to start a platform. And I said, I don't know if I'm ready to go through all this work. But I had some people, encourage me to start a platform. I had like 3 people in one day tell me, hey, you need to start your own channel. But I knew that this was going to be very hard work. Overnight success happens, and I'm not at all envious or trying to be competitive with those people who deservedly, most of them, have had overnight success. But overnight success is not the norm. And there's a lot of great channels out there that are very slow in building their subscriber base. The reason why is because in a lot of cases, well, sometimes it has to do with the technical side of things. Now, I'm not a technical guru. I've learned a little bit over the years, and I've learned quite a bit in the last year. I've upgraded pretty much all of my equipment is best equipment that I could possibly have, and it's done me wonders. But a lot of times the technical equipment, if you have cheap, hackish, audio, video, if your stuff isn't up to snuff, that's going to be, that's going to obviously, make you the underdog. But it's not always like that. A lot of times it's just, people don't, a lot of times people want to see on social media where in the 21st century, and a lot of times people want to see, quick, made to order material. They want to see, fast, young, vibrant people, doing their thing. Look, I'm going to be 50 years old in a couple of months, and I'm not by any means Mr. Popularity or Mr. Charisma. Add to that the fact that a lot of the views I bring to the table are very controversial. I already knew, and I already know that the subscriber base it's building and it's growing, but it's a very slow growth, and I'm okay with that. That's fine as long as I can continue bringing stuff to the table, because I am trying to bring relevant material to the table, which is not found elsewhere. And Jeremy, I have to thank him for posting something saying, "Hey, man, we got to get him up to 500." but 500 is going to be a good milestone for me because it's probably going to come around, a couple weeks maybe. That's going to be my 2-year anniversary. And it has been an uphill battle all the way. I am not going to lie to you. It has been a lot of work. There have been the technical issues that I dealt with. There's been a lot of criticism. There's been trolling, a lot of trolling on this channel from people that just don't like me or don't like my content and have been doing hit posts on me and stuff like that. A lot of trolling. There's been very minimal advertisement. I'm the kind of person, look, I'm a really humble guy. I hate advertising myself. And so I haven't gotten out there and, been on all the forums and, hey, you got to subscribe to my channel. There's people that do that, they write books or they do podcasts and they're always like, tune in and subscribe to my channel, do this. I'm definitely not that person. I'm like the last person to raise my hand in the room. And I've always been like that. So, that's just the way God made me. And I hate advertising myself. I hate, doing that sort of thing. So that's fine. I'll roll with that too. But it's been a lot of work. And then, of course, there's been capping, which, if you don't know, YouTube will cap a lot of conservative content. So how that works is they won't tell you exactly how their algorithm works. But what I noticed this, back last year actually is when I started to notice it, was I would notice my videos start to take off and then it would peak at a certain number of views and then it would come to almost a dead standstill. Well, apparently one of my videos actually somehow escaped the algorithm. And it actually, I don't know how it escaped the algorithm, but if I didn't have the caps, let me see if I can find it. This is going back. It's actually the most popular video I have. And it was the one kind of not humorously, but it was the one that I did with Mike Karras. It's called Full Preterism is the Answer. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. Full Preterism is the Answer with Mike Karras. Horrible video. I was using a 2012 laptop for that. And Mike did a great job. I was in the middle of moving too. So all of my stuff behind me, empty bookcases, no background or anything like that. But look, it's had 6,600 views. And I get comments from this. I get comments on this video like every other day. I'll get somebody commenting. Most of the comments I don't have time to answer to. But look, YouTube, anyone who thinks that the big social media companies don't cap outreach, that's not true. Now there's platforms that will start right out 30,000 subscribers. A lot of that stuff is controlled opposition, like a lot of the Christian national stuff. Those guys are sponsored by, I don't know, they're intel organizations or whatever, but they're a lot of the right-wing stuff is controlled opposition. It's get people to raise their hand so that when the left finally does take over for good, they know which doors to knock on. They're trying to get a show of hands is what they're doing. I did a podcast about this. I guess it was it was right when I started my channel about Christian nationalism being controlled opposition. I strongly suspect it is. But anyways, it's been a lot of work and it's been a lot of rewarding work. I've got a lot of great stuff on here, but we're going to keep bringing it to you and we're going to keep doing these panel discussions. I have actually invited Steve to do another one with me. And I said, look, we'll get another full preterist. It'll be me, you, another full preterist, and then maybe, someone else that we haven't had on before, and we could try to have another discussion. I don't know if he'll say yes, but again, it's up to him. I mean, he may want to just cool his heels for a little while and, not do this, which is perfectly fine. I had to take a break myself after I was a full preterist for, couple of years, and I did apologetics for 3 years, and then I had to take a break. So I don't have a problem with people taking breaks. But anyways, that's all I have really. I do appreciate the views. I appreciate the interaction. It's always been good. And well, here we go. Hello.
Oh, hello.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. I didn't think you were going to show up today. I almost called you a bad guy. I said, this guy's a bad guy. He's not going to show up tonight. But I'm glad you did. I was just making some announcements, and I saw your. Let me go ahead and stop the screen share. Yeah. So I just want to have a talk, and it's a nice, polite talk. It's not going to be throwing stones or anything. Um, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I appreciate it. You know, I know we were talking a little bit the other day about, me being I used to be a full preterist. And then of course, you've been a full preterist. I don't know. How long have you been a full preterist for?
2 years.
2 years. Yeah. I mean, I understand I understand the rationale of full preterism. I've said this before. Look, if amillennialism is true, right? If they were, if the millennium started on the cross or in Christ's earthly ministry, then I think full preterism would be like the most logical solution, because I've said this in my debates. You probably know I have. Um, if Christ told his first century audience to wait for his coming, watch for his coming, right? So how could he be telling them to watch for his coming if the coming couldn't happen for at least 1,000 years? I've asked every millennialist I've asked that has has totally short circuited. They've never given me a clear answer. I've debated a couple decent quality caliber millennialists, but it seems like these guys, they can't answer those questions. So I said, well, if they were in the millennium and you accept, all you have to do is accept the time statements, and boom, you're a full preterist. You have to be. There's no question. It's a paper thin wall between amillennialism and full preterism. So I 100% understand where you're coming from. I mean, this generation, he's going to come soon. Um, I don't. I mean, I don't fault you. I don't fault anybody for following their religious convictions. I just don't. I can't do that. Um, the only thing I would point out is what I think there's some sloppy exegesis when we start getting into the details. It's the details, the details, the details. And when we start getting into the details, there's a little bit of a sloppy. I feel there's some sloppiness, and like, well, we don't need to. Those details aren't important because we knew what time it was. So it's like, well, we let the details take care of themselves. And problem with that is some of those details actually confirm, or they don't, whether that fulfillment happened, or they can help confirm for us what was supposed to happen, and if it happened in the same manner as expected. So that's been my biggest problem with full preterism. But I really haven't, again, I'm not one of these guys that's like, you're a full preterist, you're going to hell. I don't know who's elect and who's not. I've never made that call.
Yeah. So I guess what you're saying is you stopped being a full preterist because there's a detail that wasn't answered properly for you. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Well, no, not necessarily. That's what I think now. I stopped being a full preterist. This was back in 2007. So I was a full preterist from 2005 to 2007, and it's kind of funny because how I got into full preterism was I read J. Stuart Russell's book, and I didn't know anything about Max King or any of those guys. I didn't know anything about covenant eschatology, but I ran into an old Baptist minister. His name is Joe Thomas, and he ran a church out in not California, out in Pensacola, called what was it called? It was called Orthodox Pensacola Orthodox Baptist Preterist Assembly, and he wasn't like a highly educated guy, but he was a full preterist. He always used to put articles out on his church website. And I picked up some of his articles and I listened to some of his sermons. I ended up going down there. This was when I was, still in the Baptist ministry. I ended up going down to his church and we had some fellowship and there was some other, I met a lot of other preterists and I accepted full preterism through his ministry. And he actually, Ward Fenley was actually at some point associated with his church because, Joe gave me his book. But, I started seeing what really made me leave was because I converted to universalism like within a few months after I accepted full preterism. I started seeing the wages of sin is death. And without law there is no transgression. And I started seeing, well, sin, death, and the law, they're all connected. So when one falls, it's like a domino. I used to say like it's like a domino effect where one of them falls and the whole thread is unraveled. Like Paul says, the sting of death is sin and the strength of sin is the law. So if there's no sin, well, sin would be defined by the law, right? And so they said, well, the law ended in AD 70. So, well, there you go. There's your standard for defining what sin is. And so if there's no more sin, then, there can't be any more death because death is the wages of sin, but then death is destroyed. So I kind of started tying everything together, became a universalist. And, from that point, I started sending articles to him and I started sending articles to other people. And they just basically, they cut contact with me. But at the end, I couldn't hold those views anymore because I realized, so what's, if God just is going to save everybody, well, what's the end game? What was the end game of him doing if he's going to save everybody, but he's not going to save them? He can save their souls and he can give them eternal life, but the God is not only in the saving souls business, he's in the making people righteous business, not, just making them forensically righteous, but making them also practically righteous. So I said, well, if he's going to save everybody, why wouldn't he make regenerate everybody? Why wouldn't he sanctify everybody? Why wouldn't he make it experiential? And that's when I realized, no, there's still a difference between lost people and saved people, even from an AD 70, post AD 70 perspective. There's still people that are out there doing things they shouldn't do. There's still people who need Jesus Christ. There's still people who are transformed by Christ. And there's still people who one can call, followers of Jesus Christ. And so I said, well, there's a problem. And so that's why I left. And I'm kind of glad I did.
Oh, um, well, I mean, there's a couple things about that though. So you're right. Sin. It's actually a definitive article most of the time when Paul is writing about it. So it is the sin and the death and the law. But you're very right. It's the same thing. They are intrinsically linked to one another. Romans 5, Paul makes it very clear that, nevertheless, the death reigned from Adam till Moses, even over those not having transgressed in the likeness of Adam. So we start to get this, and also in Hosea, I think it's 6:9, it says, but they, like Adam, transgressed the covenant. So we get this kind of like insight of what the whole story of Adam is he was the first, Adam and Eve were the first people to be made in covenantal status with God, and they broke it, right? So they're also the first to break covenantal status. That's why it is the curse of Adam that's talked about in 1 Corinthians 15, or the first Adam, right? And Christ is the last Adam, because Christ is the one that came to undo the curse of Adam and undo the death. when it comes to sin, the defeat of sin isn't that there's no more sin anymore in the world. I don't believe that. That's not even logical to me. You know, people still sin. We all still sin every day. Nobody's perfect. But the defeat of it is that sin is defined as missing the mark. That's like the actual Hebraic word for it. I believe it's Second Kings or First Kings. There were men that were archers, or no, they were slingshot. They had slingshots, right? And they could throw their slingshot without sinning, without missing the mark. So when sin is defeated, it just means that there's no more missing the mark because we are in Christ. Christ is he's the perfection, right? The telos. The telos is the end goal, and that's why Paul in Ephesians and in 1 Corinthians 13 talks about the maturity, right? He's like, when I was a child, I thought like a child, I acted like a child, I reasoned like a child, but when I matured, and he's talking about his faith. Well, he was a Pharisee of all Pharisees, so his faith would have been very mature to any kind of Hebraic person. They'd be like, dude, you're next in line to probably become the high priest. He studied under Gamaliel, very very profound, prolific man. That by his own admission, he's like, I knew nothing about faith, but the perfection of the faith, right? When the perfect comes or the mature comes, the partial fades away. Well, the maturity is in Christ. So when we are in the new covenant, the sin, the death are rendered idle. That's really what the Hebraic word is. Not so much defeated, but rendered idle because they're no longer effective. So I would say that might be how you want to look at defining sin being defeated in AD 70. We all still sin, but when we're in Christ, we have our high priest and our propitiation for that sin, and we don't have to have it on a special feast day. We don't have to wait for the Day of Atonement. We don't have to have a priest go in and do atonement for us. And, thank God we don't have to follow the 613 laws that entail being able to be part of the congregation of Israel. There are still constituent elements that we must follow if we want to be in covenantal status with Christ. That's what the video that I did yesterday was about. Paul makes it clear in Philippians 3. He's like, hey, I'm not saying I've obtained it, but I hope to obtain it, right? Because at any point he could have fallen away. Obviously, probably not, because he was an apostle of Christ, arguably the most important apostle. But by his own admission, he's like, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to claim it that I'm saved no matter what. And so there are things that we need to be aware of that we're not supposed to do to remain in covenantal status. And we're all going to screw up, but we have the propitiation. We're allowed to have that metanoia, that turning back to Christ to get back into covenantal status. And that's how the sin is rendered idle in my exegetical, study that I've done on that.
Yeah, I mean, that may be a very plausible view. I mean, I've heard, I think Larry Siegel, he was here, maybe it was earlier this year, and he said something to the effect of, the death and the sin. Problem that I have is when you look at death in the Old Testament, rather, is always defined as physical death. I can't find anything. Now, I think look, let me just say this. I think there was spiritual death. I think Adam did spiritually die. But what it was when he hid his face from God, when God was walking through the garden, he hid his face from God. He was spiritually, because he had ingested this principle of good and evil, right? So now entered into his anthropology. And so he turned his face from God. And then when you get to the cross, you find out, well, when Jesus Christ suffered he's physically died now, and he was on the cross, God hid his face from Christ. And I think that's the antitype. Now, when Adam left the garden, I believe he was fully justified. I believe he and Eve were fully justified because they had They had believed the promise that God gave them. They had accepted their sentence. They had believed the promise that there was going to be a seed of the woman. He was going to bruise the serpent's head. And then they were given garments. So they had tried to cover themselves with their own garments, with their own works. And then a sacrifice was slain. So when you say you're going to die the same day, they didn't die the same day, but it was passed on to a substitute. The substitute died, and that's why we have this picture of the God making skins to cover their nakedness, which Martin Luther had to be onto something. I am not a huge fan of Martin Luther. I think he was a bit pompous and arrogant, but with the imputed righteousness, I think he's onto something, because that's what it was. It was imputing the righteousness, or it was imputing the merits of the slain sacrifice to Adam and Eve, allowing them to leave the garden. So when we get outside the garden, what do we have? We've got death, we've got disease, we've got all kinds of the things that probably didn't exist inside the garden, and it gets worse and worse and worse from there. So when Christ comes, what does he have to do? I agree, he's the last Adam. So what does he have to do? Well, he's got to pay the penalty of the first Adam to lift mankind out of this bondage, this dominion of death. And how does he do that? Well, he doesn't die spiritually, he doesn't die covenantally, he had to die physically. So I think what happens is, and I understand your position, but I think what happens is full preterism changes the meta narrative, if you will, of the internal meta narrative of the Bible to make it mean something that it never actually meant, with this concept of spiritual death or covenantal death. Well, yeah, spiritual. I'm not going to be like, Sam Frost says there's no such thing as spiritual death. I'm not going to go that far. I believe there is spiritual death, and all mankind are spiritually dead, but that's not all there is to death. There's a whole lot more, and it has to do with physical death. And the more I started looking into it, I said, there's got to be a better answer, because if you read the epistles of Paul, and I know you can get into, verb tenses and stuff, and you can get into, there's other arguments that people use to try to get away from the physicality. But I believe Paul was expecting a physical resurrection. Now, we can define physical. It doesn't have to be bodies coming out of the ground. And that's why I want to say, I don't want to define, I don't want to start making definitions. But what I'm saying is it had to be at least experiential. So it had to be at least something that can be experienced in space-time on a cognitive level at the very least. That would have to be a minimal claim that you would have to make, because we could say, well, the body is just really, it's a part of you that's not seen, but it's going to germinate into something else. It's not the flesh. Or we could say, well, it was something else. But ultimately, it's got to be experiential, because Paul was awaiting something. He was awaiting a transformation which would have resulted in the eradication of his sin nature. He felt sin struggling in his members. He knew that he needed deliverance, not just from the law, but from himself. And this is part of this is part of Christianity. A part of the deliverance that comes from Jesus Christ is not just saving us from from Moses, from his condemnation, but is saving us from our own corruption, our internal, our anthropological corruption. And that's done, it's not all done at once. It's done, he gives you the down payment, and then later on, he gives you the full thing. So what I'm saying is, maybe, and I don't mean to keep going on, but maybe you could answer this. So he gave Paul and he gave the first century saints, he gave them the down payment, and they were experiencing, that was something they experienced. They realized that they had, been, baptized into Christ's death, that they had risen again in newness of life, all that. But it was experiential. And then they were waiting for the second benefit. They were waiting for Christ to come back and give them the rest of what he had promised to give them. So the thing I find about full preterism that makes me not ever, really take full preterism seriously is because it's like when you get to 87, it's like, well, that wasn't supposed to be experiential. It's like, pardon me. I mean, well, what did the Paul's audience think when he told them that they were going to be caught up in clouds? Like they weren't going to be aware that it happened when it happened. What is your response to that?
Well, yeah. So you said quite a lot. I was trying to take mental notes on some things. I guess the I'll answer your question first, and then I'll kind of go over some points that you made. So I think that it's just very poetic. Um, I honestly don't think there's anything wrong with taking the the prophetic poetry and real like trying to apply it to okay, what is a literal application of this metaphorical language. Because when he says we'll be caught up in the clouds with him, when so we shall always be with the Lord in First Thessalonians 4, he's hearkening to the same thing that's talked about in Matthew 24. And Matthew 24 is talking about the same thing that's talked about in Isaiah 27. It would be because in Isaiah 27, at the end of I think it's verse 12 and 13, Isaiah says, "In that day, there shall be a loud trumpet, and you Israelites will be gathered one by one." So we get this. Isaiah has this kind of language where Israel is reading it, thinking, "Okay, this is pertaining to us. This is only pertaining to us." Right? Christ tells his apostles in the Olivet Discourse, in Matthew 24, I will gather the angels will gather the elect, the four corners of the wind when there's the final trumpet, right? This trumpet. But then Paul gets he really peels the lid back on the scope of this trumpet blowing and the people being caught up together. And that's why he says all Israel shall be saved in Romans 11. He's breaking open the barrier to let these people know that Yisrael is a title under Christ. It's no longer a physical bloodline of people. It's a title that you have when you're adopted into being the sons of God, and that's in Christ. So I think his believers knew that. I think that they were very well aware of what kind of resurrection Paul is talking about, and that's why he tells them in Second Timothy, you know, do not be, or it's actually in Second Thessalonians too. He goes, don't be fooled by any letter or anything that might appear to be from us saying that that day already happened. How could any? It's impossible for anybody to be fooled that the resurrection would have happened or the rapture would have happened if it was physical, right? Like it would just be abundantly clear. You would see bodies flying up into the sky, or even if you want to say, well, it doesn't necessarily have to deal with dead bodies for the resurrection. If you think it's anything physical, it'd be really hard to try and justify people being able to be fooled that it already happened, unless it was something physical that was like so minute that it wasn't that big of a deal anyway. Like, oh, you got goosebumps. There was your physical resurrection, right? Like, it, I think that you have to take it either in a literal sense, it's a really big deal that would be impossible to miss, or in a literary sense and not necessarily physical. So I think that his audience was well aware of that. Um, to answer your question about physical, spiritual death, you're right. There is spiritual death, and actually, I believe the Bible is nothing but a book of covenants. Okay, well, I shouldn't say nothing, but it's obviously the most important thing in the world. But when it boils down to like the bare bones basics of it, it's a book of covenants, right? And it's interesting because as God progresses the narratives, he starts with a very simple covenant with Adam, where he's like, "Hey, you can do whatever you want. You guys are good no matter what. You're in covenant with me. Just don't eat from the tree." Right? One single constituent element. Don't eat from the tree. What do? They eat from the tree. So God's like, "Okay, well, you're right. He did perform an animal sacrifice. I believe that was the original Day of Atonement. The animal, the atonement was made with the animal being killed with the animal skins, right? Um, and so they were able to get back in covenantal status with God, but they were kicked out from the MHP. right? Eden is typological of the most holy place. It's the first most holy place, and so God places the cherubim there with the spinning sword and everything of fire to signify you ain't getting back in. You can be in covenant with me, but as of the moment that you ate of that tree of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, I am no longer dwelling with my creation. So you get this language of God hiding his face from people. Not even that Adam hid his face from God, but now God is hiding his face from people. When Cain kills Abel, Cain says, if you hide your face from me, and it's more than I can bear. Um, that's actually very common language. The God hiding his face all through the Old Testament. It's talking about not being in covenantal status with him. When we get to Revelation 22, right? They shall see him face. They see him face to face. God is now back in covenantal status, and it even says, "Lo, the tabernacle of God is with man." God is now dwelling back with his creation, undoing the curse of Adam, undoing the actions of Adam. But the covenants that God makes, they get a little bit more strict as time goes on. So he made a simple covenant with Adam, right? They broke that covenant, and then he gets with Noah. Okay, well, he makes the covenant with Noah. There's a little bit more constituent elements to it. It's a little bit more strict, but still not bad, right? Then you get to Abraham, a little bit more constituent elements with Abraham, and then you get to Israel, where he just all out is like, okay, you've got 600 constituent, 600 some odd constituent elements that you have to follow. This is the law. This is the covenant, and so the reversal of that is getting back to the last Adam, where there's just the one constituent element, where Christ sums it up. Show agape to your fellow Christians. Right, that's abiding in Christ. Um, so I do agree with you on some points, but to really drive home the fact of that the Garden of Eden was all about covenant. You see in Ezekiel, I believe it's 27, God is saying through Ezekiel, the prophet, that the king of Tyre was just like Adam, right? In the garden I brought you in. You walked amongst the burning stones in the garden. You were adorned with all these beautiful jewels and gems and the gold that was in the garden. He's talking about, like, hey, the king of Tyre was even made in covenantal status with me, but he's going to break it. And when he breaks it, that's when I'm going to take, Tyre is going down. And that happened, right? That's true. It really actually happened, where Tyre was made a desolation. It got completely sacked, and now it's nothing more than a little fishing port, right? Opposed to what it used to be as a giant bustling, um, you know, really important port city. So I think that the Bible, being a book of covenant, is the Garden of Eden was the typological MHP. Adam got kicked out and nobody went back in. Even under Levitical law, only the high priest was allowed to go into the MHP, and only once a year. Right? It's not like he was going in there hanging out all the time amongst the mercy seat. No, God's like, you're only going to be allowed in my presence once a year, and it's to make atonement. And then you go first to make atonement for your family, and then you need to come back. You need to come back in and go back out to make atonement for the rest of the congregation. And that was it, once a year. If anybody else even touched the Ark of the Covenant, they got killed. So obviously nobody was going in there. So that curse being undone, though, is that now we all have direct access to, right. That's what Paul says in Hebrews. Christ was the forerunner to enter into the MHP, into which now we have direct, bold, confident access. It's a very big deal, right? That's like to tell a Jew, hey man, don't worry, you're good. We're going to have direct, bold, confident access to the MHP is very radical. But when the tabernacle of God is with men, which is what happens in Revelation 22, that's it, man. The curse is undone. Now we're in the garden again, typologically, right? So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, I see some of that. I see some of that. I mean, I don't, like I said, I don't fault you for your approach. I understand the rationale, the methodology behind it. What would you say? And I don't think I've heard your view on this before. And Tristan, he's here. He might weigh in a little bit. I don't know if he can come on, come on video or anything. But I just wanted to ask you, oh, here he is. How's it going, Tristan?
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. I just wanted to ask, well, as a matter of fact, I'll tell you what. Well, let me just ask Steve, not Steve, um, Professing Preterist real quick. So what is your opinion of church history? Because honestly, I mean, it's not squeaky clean where it's like everything, Christianity, the apostles all die in AD 70, and then you get the corrupt church. It's, well, he lived, what, till the time of Trajan? At least that's the report, right? So that was 90, 98, 99, maybe. So I mean, how do you reconcile church history being so different from full preterism? I mean, apostasy, great apostasy, another apostasy. What is the truth behind it? Because Christ shows up and then the light switch goes off. What happened?
No, baby, okay. Well, I mean, what I would say is, people say, well, Polycarp studied directly under, John, so how could Polycarp not know? I'm gonna be honest with you, I wasn't there, and it's not in the Bible, so I can't, personally myself, say I necessarily believe, that Polycarp studied directly under, John or whatever. You know what I mean? I'm just, if he did and he still wasn't aware of the promises of covenantal eschatology, then I think that Polycarp was probably not a very good student. you know, um, John makes it very clear in the book of Revelation that the thing to pass short. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Are you there?
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. So yeah, church history. I'm not gonna lie, man. I'm not really the guy to speak on it because I don't particularly, I make my own conclusions. I think that, I've never really bothered to read through all the creeds and the councils of this and councils of that because I just want to listen to what God says in the Bible. That's the most important thing to me. That supersedes everything. I do know that the the creeds though. Mike Sullivan did a really good podcast on it. In the creeds, it does say, hey, if we ever are proven wrong about anything biblically, it supersedes what we have written in these creeds. So,
Yeah, I hear you.
That's really what
Tristan, you have anything for Professing Preterist? Anything you want to ask or anything you want to throw out there?
Yeah, I'd like to. First and foremost, are you driving, Professing Preterist? Are you driving right now? I don't want to put anything in danger. It sounds like you're driving.
Yeah, you're good though. We're trying to find a off-road spot real quick, so you're good. Oh, coyote.
Okay. Well, I would like to touch on the experiential factor. When you were on Standing for Truth in your debate, I super chat a question about how they experience that. You criticize neuroscience, which many Christians are very keen to neuroscience. It's empirical data. It would be like bringing in forensic science in a court case. It's something that is not science fiction. You had said that the saints must have experienced indigestion. And when you had said that the saints must have experienced indigestion, I received a lot of responses from that. And many Christians were offended that you would compare the return of Christ, this glorious event, to, passing gas. Would you like to clarify when you had said the word indigestion, when they experienced the change to immortality, the catching away of the saints? I don't think that is an appropriate and a very erroneous exegetical response to something that is so very serious. What would be your response to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just actually drawing the indigestion more to like the silliness of the proposed question. Well, your brain neurons were firing, therefore the resurrection was physical. Okay, God doesn't speak in the realm of neuroscience, so it's kind of a moot point.
So I don't believe it's a moot point because many veteran Christians.
Well, of course you don't believe it's a moot point.
Well, it's not just
But
me, because
I think it is.
Phelan had done a great job. Phelan, who's a very well experienced believer, was just talking about how it had to have at least been experiential on the cognitive level. So when you had said that the saints must have experienced indigestion, I think that that points towards the silliness of the full preterist hermeneutic, that something must have taken place in order for the living saints to process this information, that the time of fulfillment had occurred.
Yeah,
They must have at least processed it on a cognitive level. That's why I asked, well,
yeah,
what happened? And you said indigestion, and many found that. I received at least 8 responses to that through email and social media, where it's semi blasphemous, in my opinion,
okay.
to compare the glorious return of Christ. I never said indigestion. Okay. So when you said indigestion, would you like to take back those words, or do you still hold firm to those words?
No, so again, I'm not comparing the return of Christ to indigestion. I'm comparing your insistence on neuroscience.
You're comparing my argument to indigestion. I didn't say
Correct.
indigestion.
Your argument is indigestion. Yes, that's a good way to look at it. At least in my
Well,
and I'm
well,
just saying that's just how I feel about your position on it. I get it. I know why you're trying to say that. You think it's some kind of gotcha, but if you want to know what the perception of it was happening, the return of Christ happening, well, if you and me could hop in a time machine and go back to AD 70 and watch from afar and
uh-huh.
see that the city was burning and that it was destroyed, that's our perception, man.
Well,
That's the physical perception of it.
where we could hop into Don Preston's literature on page 165 in his book, the Wedding of the King of Kings. We shall meet him in the air. He tried to do his best to give an experiential explanation when he said that they were to escort his bodiless presence into the spiritual realm and escort his bodiless presence, and compared it to Elisha's servant, when Elisha's servant tapped into the unseen realm, seeing the chariot armies surrounding them. So you may think that it's silly, but Don Preston has tried to give a modicum of an experiential explanation to this time of fulfillment. And so I just like to know, you had stated, I don't know, man. It must have been indigestion. I don't know. I don't recall you saying that my argument was indigestion, but that you said it comically that they must have experienced indigestion.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So the reason why I said that is to more draw, to the argument. And I mean, I guess, maybe Don is trying to reconcile it, and because I'm sure there's tons of people that would have a problem with it. That's just not my wheelhouse. I don't think that God is necessarily concerned with neuroscience, as far as the Bible goes.
Okay, but you know that there are many Christian scholars that bring up neuroscience to prove intelligent design, to bring up the fact that there's a creator. So why not we just be consistent and apply that to our hermeneutic on how they must have experienced it? We bring up science. We bring up science about what we bring up science to talk about the crucifixion of Christ, that he was, on the cross for hours, how he bled, how, the physical reactions of must have taken place. We see science applied to the Bible all the time in the world of apologetics. So I'm just being consistent. Why can't we just apply? Fine, let's not talk about science. Let's just talk about common sense. What happened to those living saints when they experienced the change to immortality? What happened to all of the living saints that were in different geographical locations? What happened to them at that twinkling of an eye? What took place?
What took place was that the temple was destroyed in AD 70. And I made the same argument when I talked to Tommy McMurdy. Tommy McMurdy was like, oh, well, AD 70 wasn't that big of a deal. It didn't affect anybody over in Ephesus or anything like that. And I'm like, okay, well, then Christ's death on the cross wasn't that big of a deal because it was just another Wednesday in Athens. What do you mean? You know what I mean? It doesn't matter if anybody was around to see it. What matters is it happened. Christ died on the cross and everything changed about everything. But guess what? The Aztecans were still running around in the jungle. So they stopped and said, whoa, did you guys feel that? Looks like somebody died in the cross over in Jerusalem. You know what I mean?
Yeah. this is an argument which definitely, I think this is really the center of the whole debate.
Well, dying on a is a little different. Saying that we who are remain caught up.
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Okay, you came back. You disappeared for a
Hey,
little
how
while.
you doing?
All right.
I think we're just breaking up a little bit. It could have been my connection. Okay. Yeah, let me if I could touch on his statements. He talked about the cross, that happening. Well, the cross was not a change to immortality or a catching away of the saints with the dead in Christ. The full preterists say that the dead ones were in Hades, and there was a literal change of location. Professing preterists. Um, Even Ephesians 3, Don Preston has stated that at the ascension, the dead in Hades actually went up with Christ. So to compare the cross to the catching away of the saints, I believe is completely untenable. But anyways, are you still there? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you really quickly, and I'm going to go ahead and get off really quickly. You had mentioned that it was unseen, okay? So I'm just trying to see what senses of the living saints process this information. The full preterists say that the eyesight was hacked off, that it was in the unseen realm. Nobody saw it. And then the full preterists state that nobody heard anything neither. They didn't hear a trumpet. The Lord himself will descend from heaven with the trumpet. So they didn't see it. They didn't hear it. Did they smell it? Did they taste it? Did they feel it? And which of the five senses was applied in the experiential factor or the processing on at least the cognitive level? It had to have at least been on a cognitive level where they can say, hey, look, now we're of equal status. Look, now we're changed to immortality. It's been fulfilled. So what senses were applied? That's all. Because you can't say eyesight. You can't say eyesight because remember, Don Preston has done a great job explaining how it was unseen. He talks about how it was not optically visible. So if the eyesight was hacked off, nobody heard a trumpet. It's all metaphor. So then the ears, your hearing is hacked off. So then I just say, okay, well then taste, smell. Did they smell it? What senses?
Well, yeah, I think if it's all tied to the destruction of the temple in AD 70, then there's your senses.
Right. So the coming of the Lord, the catching away of the saints, the mental image is women cooking their kids, right? And this horrible event where the besiegement of Jerusalem for 5 months, correct? Okay, so that is the glorious return of Christ. Correct. I'm glad you said that. So the metaphor, so the catching away of the dead ones you believe went up into heaven though, right?
Correct. Yeah, those that were dead got judged.
Right. I'm talking about the living. Did you experience it together? Okay. So the dead ones didn't have the temple in mind, right? The dead ones that went up into heaven, the catching away of the saints, they didn't have the temple in mind. That wasn't their mental imagery, correct? Hello?
You still there, Professing Preterist? Yeah, he may have cut out on us. He's still up. He still has his audio and video up, but he's not saying anything right now. So we'll wait for him to come back on. But okay, so he ducked out. So yeah, and he may come back, but I want to thank you for tuning in. Tristan, thanks for taking some time out of your day. I see it's still daylight there. It looks beautiful, looks nice and sunny. Wow, it's Friday night. What are you up to?
I'm just gonna go home and just eat some popcorn, watch some good films, and just go to sleep.
That's great, man. Well, hey, thanks for coming on. It's been great seeing you.
Of course. I don't know if he's going to hop back on, but thank you for having me on. I know it was a little random, but I couldn't help myself. Thank you for the invitation. But I think we can see here that this is a grip on the full preterist, in my opinion, just that one word. And by you being a veteran in this game, confirming the importance of this experiential factor, I think speaks volumes. And from what I'm hearing from people on Facebook, that wow, like this is very important, and I think that every full preterist needs to at least attempt to give an answer. And so, it is what it is.
Yeah, well, we'll do another discussion soon. I don't think it doesn't look like he's coming back. So we'll wrap it up, but we'll do another discussion soon. Maybe we can have one, I don't know, next week, maybe the week after. But I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you so much, Phelan.
All right, good night, man.
All right,
Nice seeing
good
you.
night.
All right.
Likewise, thank you. Bye bye.